my favorite little books called The Curious Sofa, a pornographic work by Ogdred Weary, which is, of course, a pseudonym for Edward Gorey. Let's begin. This book is dedicated for others. That's all it says. For others. For others. Alice was eating grapes in the park when Herbert, an extremely well-endowed young man, introduced himself to her. He invited her to go for a ride in a taxicab, on the floor of which they did something Alice had never done before. After they had done it several times, in different ways, Herbert suggested that Alice tidy up at the home of his aunt, Lady Celia, who welcomed them with great cordiality. Lady Celia led Alice to her boudoir, where she requested the girl to perform a rather surprising service. Downstairs, the three of them played a most amusing game of Herbert's own invention called Thumb Fumble. Thumb Fumble. Thumb Fumble. They then sat down to a sumptuous tea. After he had finished the washing up, Albert, the butler, an unusually well-formed man of middle age, joined them for another frolic. Herbert and Lady Celia had little difficulty in persuading Alice to spend a few days with them. In the interval before dinner, she perused an album of instructive chromolithographs entitled Der Leben und Dreibig Boflicht, which Lady Celia had thoughtfully set out. Colonel Gilbert and his wife Louise came in after dinner. Both of them had wooden legs, which they could do all sorts of entertaining tricks. The evening was a huge success, in spite of someone fainting from time to time. From time to time. From time to time. Alice, quite exhausted, was helped to bed by Lady Celia's French maid, Lise, whom she found delightfully sympathetic. The next morning, she was wakened in a novel fashion by Lady Celia, in time for elevensies. Looking out the window, she saw Herbert, Albert, and Harold, the gardener, an exceptionally well-made youth, disporting themselves on the lawn. They were soon joined by Donald, Herbert's singularly well-favored sheepdog, and many were the giggles and barks that came from the shrubbery. They called up to Alice, who, having put on an ingeniously constructed bathing slip, met them in the pool. At luncheon, which was al fresco, Lady Celia announced they were invited to the Gilberts for the weekend. To beguile the tedium of the journey, Albert read aloud from volume 11 of the Encyclopedia of Unimaginable Customs. As they drove up to the house, Lucy, the Gilbert's daughter, and Gerald, her fiancé, an uncommonly well-shaped older man, emerged from an ornamental urn. That evening in the library, Scalia, one of the guests who had certain anatomical peculiarities, demonstrated the Lithuanian typewriter, assisted by Ronald and Robert, two remarkably well set up young men from the village. Later, Reginald, another remarkably well set up young man from the village, provided everyone with the most astonishing little device. Still later, Gerald did a terrible thing to Elise with a saucepan. The party split into 2s and 3s before retiring. At breakfast, it was learned that Elise had expired during the night, and gloom descended on everybody. When a change of scene was proposed, Lady Celia suggested a visit to the nearby seat of Sir Egbert, a dear friend of her youth. When they got there, they found Sir Egbert, an extraordinarily well-proportioned old gentleman, and his friend Louis, having a romp on the terrace. They all went indoors and worked up some most intriguing charades. During the light buffet supper, Louis did a dance with a boa. Sir Egbert offered to show them his famous sofa. Alice felt a shudder of nameless apprehension. It stood in a windowless room, lined with polar bear fur, and otherwise empty. It was upholstered in scarlet velvet, and had 9 legs and 7 arms. As soon as everybody had crowded into the room, Sir Egbert fastened shut the door, and started up the machinery inside the sofa. When Alice saw what was about to happen, she began to scream uncontrollably. That was the book, The Curious Sofa, read in its entirety. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good evening. Have a good evening. Have a good evening.